And I'm Tommy Gardner with the News and Citizen, and thank you to the candidates for coming out. Thank you all for sticking around. This is the second of 3 debates that have been taking place over the past 2 nights, all of which are being recorded and live streamed by our friends at Green Mountain Access Television for viewing now at this moment, and for later if you want on their YouTube channel. So welcome also to any of you watching at home. Tonight's debate is between Richard Bailey, a Republican from Hyde Park, incumbent Kate Donnally, a Democrat from Hyde Park, incumbent Dan Noyes, a Democrat from Wolcott, and Teale, a Republican from Hyde Park. If you've been here before, the debate will proceed as follows. First, the candidates will present their opening statements. Then we'll have a number of questions from me, interspersed by 2 rounds in which the candidates get to ask each other some questions. At the end, we'll have them have some brief closing statements, and we'll be on our way. So we're going to go in alphabetical order with the opening statements. You have 3 minutes each of you for your opening statements. And we'll start with Richard Bailey. And one more thing, actually, really quick, Greg Popa, publisher, also timekeeper, promises he'll actually do his job. Thanks. Go ahead, Richard.
Thank you, Tommy. Good evening, everybody. My name's Richard Bailey, a 29-year resident of Hyde Park. I'm one of 2 Republican candidates running for the Vermont House from Lamoille District 2, which includes Belvidere, Hyde Park, Johnson, and Wolcott. I want to thank you to the News and Citizen for inviting me to today's Lamoille District 2 debate. Thank you to Tommy Gardner for moderating. Thank you for the audience here in PA Auditorium and ones watching remotely for attending this debate. I would like to thank right up front the police, the National Guard, healthcare professionals, truckers, construction workers, paving contractors, flaggers, store clerks, and all workers for being on the job daily. During COVID, we learned without these folks how much our daily lives would suffer. Lamoille 2 is a 2-member district, and I'd be honored to serve the citizens of these communities in the state of Vermont and in the Vermont legislature. As a lifelong Vermonter, I believe the legislature should focus on keeping Vermont affordable, not trying to change the world. If elected, I intend to work cooperatively with Governor Scott on his stated agenda, growing the economy, making Vermont more affordable, protecting the most vulnerable, and cherishing our natural resources. Vermonters always have valued working collaboratively to accomplish common goals. Shouldn't the legislature be working more closely with the governor? Why the constant grandstanding, which helps no one and accomplishes nothing? It's my observation over the last 10 to 20 years, the state has not been a friend to Vermont companies, and this is one of the reasons why I'm running for the Vermont House. We need to balance the discussion in the state legislature. For-profit companies pay the revenue the states rely on and create badly needed jobs. I will work to make Vermont government more of a partner than an adversary. I will not support any program that is going to make it more expensive to do business in Vermont or make it more expensive for Vermont citizens to live here. I support slowing the growth of state spending, repealing unnecessary regulations, and lowering taxes and fees. And there will be times when both sides will need to compromise. We are one of the greenest states in the union, and punishing Vermonters is not the answer to global warming. We can implement changes without damaging our business and our family. And I do not have an issue of lowering our carbon footprint, but I do not believe in a carbon tax. I am not sure we are getting the balanced discussion on climate change.
20 seconds.
Fuel costs, I will not agree to increase fuel costs for Vermonters and small business. Encourage young folks to go into all the trades. My running mate, Teale, a 40-year carpenter, his skills need to be taught to our young people. Energy, without affordable energy of all types, we cannot maintain a strong and enjoyable lifestyle. Thank you for inviting me here this evening, and have a good evening.
All right. Thank you, Richard. Kate Donnally.
Thanks, Tommy. Hello, my name is Kate Donnally. Like many folks in our community, I wear many different hats. I'm a wife and a mom of 2 young kids. I'm a small business owner, property owner, a landlord. I'm also a social worker, a therapist, and a community organizer. I'm a born and raised Vermonter. I'm a proud member of the LGBTQ community, and I'm an equally proud member of the recovery community and recently celebrated over 5 years sober from booze. I carry all of these hats and identities with me into my current role, serving alongside Dan and Senator Westman as the state representative for Lamoille-2 District. Serving my community in this way over the past 2 years has truly been an honor of a lifetime, and I just want to take the opportunity to thank my community for entrusting me with this role. I do not take that trust lightly. I've shared this story before, but 2 years ago I was approached and asked if I would run, and at the time my wife and I were neck deep in the early days of COVID. We had a 2-year-old and a 5-year-old at home. Daycares and schools were shut down. We were desperately trying to figure out how to care for the kids full-time, manage and maintain our incomes, and somehow our sanity, frankly. There were so many good reasons not to run, but every reason not to run seemed like an equally compelling reason to step up and run. It was clear to us that we needed political representatives that understood the current challenges of juggling parenting, childcare payments, the hustle required to pay the bills, growing debt loads. And as social workers, we also believed strongly in the need to elect people with a certain skill set, people who have the capacity to have hard conversations, who listen closely, who work to ensure that all voices are represented at the table, who will advocate to ensure that there's room at the table for people who are most impacted by our policy decisions. And after 2 years of service in the legislature, I can say that my motivations to run remain the same. My experience has only strengthened my belief in the importance of who is at the table as policy decisions are made. The best policies are created when we have diverse voices at the table, when we build strong coalitions, when we listen to one another, and work to ensure a path forward that centers the most impacted parties. Doing good policy work is a skill set. My life experience and work experience have allowed me to develop a skill set that has made me an effective legislator. If reelected, I'll continue to bring this skill set to my work in service of our community. I'll continue to work to ensure that the needs of our most vulnerable neighbors are met and that impacted Vermonters have a voice at the table. I want to again thank my community for entrusting me with this role over the past 2 years. Thanks for the opportunity to be here tonight, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Kate. Next up, we have Dan Noyes.
Thank you, Tommy, and the News and Citizen for taking the time to host this debate, and thank you for everyone who showed up tonight. It's been an honor and a privilege to serve my community as a representative for the past 6 years. I've been fortunate to serve on the Human Services Committee, where my passion for helping people meets my interest in digging deeply into legislative policy. Serving on the committee gives me a front seat to many of the issues that are a concern for our community, like how do we make sure Meals on Wheels programs are supported and older Vermonters do not go hungry? Is there quality, affordable childcare options in our community so that parents don't have to choose between having a career and raising a family? And how do we support and replicate the addiction and recovery work that is happening at Jenna's Promise across the state so one day the opioid overdoses are not the leading cause of death of young people? My work in the legislature is not limited to human services. I'm deeply involved in trying to make sure rural Vermont has access to affordable housing by reducing barriers to permitting and empowering communities to make their own decisions about where and how housing should be built. I also have been a strong advocate for making sure we have lasting investments in high-speed internet so that all areas of our state have access. I will continue to support our state college system and technical and career centers to ensure they are relevant and adequately funded so our next generation workforce have the skills needed to be successful. I often think about why I want to serve and why I'm seeking re-election. Apart from the fact that I like talking to people, to me, it's about solving problems and being creative. That is what gets me out of bed every morning, and at the same time, keeps me up at night. When someone calls me, regardless of where they live, I try my best I can to helping them address the issue they're having with state government, and in some cases, the federal government. I rely on my network of friends, colleagues, and community leaders to help me find solutions and understand what are often complex problems. No surprise, there's not an no surprise, there's not an over years, working and serving our community. I can pick up the phone and call Michael at Lamoille Mental Health or Carol at the Family Center. And when it's an issue with an insurance company or Social Security, I have contacts needed to hopefully help solve the problem. I'm lucky to have the networks I have. I'm here tonight to ask for your vote and to answer questions you have about my candidacy. But as I'm sure you know, tonight is not where your access to your state representative ends. You can always reach out. I'm available to listen to your concerns, answer questions, and to be present. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Mac Teale.
Hi, I'm Mac Teale. I'm running for Lamoille-2, Wolcott, Hyde Park, Johnson, and Belvidere. I've worked in the construction business since 1977. My wife Tina and I have lived in Hyde Park for 36 years. We've raised 2 kids there. I'm running for office because I think we can do better. To give you an idea of where I'm coming from, here are some of the ways that I think we can make Vermont a better place to live. We need to make Vermont a less expensive place to live. We need to address overregulation, energy policy. I think we can work on reducing carbon emissions without creating a self-imposed energy crisis. I'm a strong advocate for nuclear and hydropower. I favor school choice. Vermont's tax burden is too heavy. High property taxes make rents higher and undermine the biggest asset that the middle class has, which is their home. Healthcare, I think the efforts of the state and the Green Mountain Care Board seem to have resulted in a growing healthcare and health insurance monopoly and have failed to contain costs. Drug addiction is a serious problem facing us, and we need to address that. As a fusion candidate for the Republican and Libertarian parties, I believe that our freedoms are being eroded. We are overtaxed. How we access health care is dictated by the government. How we work, how we use our land, how we educate our children, how much we pay for energy, etc. I'd appreciate a chance to serve you in Montpelier. Thank you.
Thank you, Mac. All right, we'll move on to questions from your moderator, and we're gonna kind of do a snake down the line as who goes first answering questions. So Richard opened, so Kate, you're gonna answer this first question first. Kate, there's a lot of marquee issues that get attention, and you'll be asked about some of those tonight. But what is an issue that you think is somewhat of a sleeper and does not get enough attention?
Tommy, I've been watching these debates and you haven't asked this question yet.
I know.
So I'm just going to need a moment to collect my thoughts. I'm going to be really transparent about the first thought that comes to mind, and I'm going to be honest about the fact that this is a challenging and unfortunately, in my mind, contentious issue. I mentioned being a proud member of the LGBTQ community. I also mentioned being a therapist in the community. And as both of those things are true about me, I have become a referral source that many, many young queer and trans identified youth are referred to my practice. And you would think in a small rural community that would be a small number of referrals, and it is not. It is a massive number of referrals of young people who are struggling in our community. And they're not struggling because of their identity, they're struggling because they live in a society and a culture in which their identity is stigmatized. And the data tells us over and over again, we have something called the Youth Risk Behavior Survey, which is put out every 2 years and gives us very accurate data about how youth in Vermont are doing. And it tells us again and again that queer youth are suffering immensely, immensely. And I believe that at this time, we are not doing nearly enough in our state to address the needs, the mental health needs, the physical health needs of queer and trans-identified youth. People want to make this discussion of parental rights, whatever that term means exactly. And what we're talking about, how many seconds? 10. What we're talking about essentially is how do we protect the safety of our children? It's not about attacking parental rights, but rather are children safe in their homes and in our schools? And we need policy to address those things. Thank you.
Thank you, Kate. Dan, do you need the question repeated?
No.
Kobe?
So kind of a sleeper issue. It's not a sleeper for me. It's something I've been working on since I've been in the legislature. And we have an aging population in Vermont. And many of our home and community-based providers are not reimbursed at the rates they need to be able to pay their workforce a livable wage. These are people that go into homes and provide in-home care for older Vermonters and individuals with disabilities. I have been working on legislation for this for the past 5 years, 6 years. H-153 was my last bill that I put in on this. And actually, it got put in the budget. So it's looking at the reimbursement rates and we don't really have a good grasp on what it costs to deliver these services. So we really need to figure out what it costs, what services we're providing out at the agencies, and we're gonna have to figure out how to make sure that people have access to in-home care so that they don't end up in nursing homes, which will cost us quite a bit more money. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Mac, your question, do you need that repeated?
Yeah, repeat the question, please.
Okay. There are a lot of marquee issues that get a lot of attention these days in politics, and some of which we'll explore tonight. But what is an issue that you think is a sleeper that does not get enough attention?
Boy. Well, energy is certainly not a sleeper issue, but I'm a big proponent of nuclear power. I don't think that the program that we're embarked on right now with renewable energy is gonna succeed. And nuclear power just got a bad name in the United States. We pretty much stopped doing research on it. But as far as its environmental footprint, I don't think anything comes close to nuclear power in terms of it's a minimal environmental impact for the maximum amount of power. And we seem to be in a place where, well, we'll conserve. I don't think we should conserve. I think we should harness nuclear energy so that we have all kinds of power. Because if you want to uplift people, that's the way to do it. More energy, not less.
Thank you, Mac. Pass the mic on down to Richard, please.
Okay.
Richard,
No
do
problem.
you got the question? You need it?
No, I think I'm fine. Thanks, Tommy.
All right.
Probably what I've been campaigning on out in my district is, and I'm not sure the wording's correct, but I heard the welfare cliff. That when we finally get people out on the working world, they're getting help from the state. As their pay goes up and they start moving up into the company, their benefits, I would seem to think we should be looking to get those done on a sliding scale, so that as they're moving up, we can lower the benefits, and when they finally get to a level where they're making a wage they can sustain on, that then we can stop the benefit. But when you cut them off at the knees, it doesn't help them any, and they end up either back where they started or not staying with the job. So I think with all our technology, that we ought to be able to have programs written that they can figure this out down in the Human Services Department so that we can get that on a sliding scale.
Thank you, Richard. The next question, we'll start with Dan Noyes. The pandemic and the subsequent turn to remote work and remote learning brought the need for strong broadband to the forefront, especially for people used to that who are moving to the state from more urban areas. How will you work to ensure that Vermonters, including those, especially those in rural areas, have access to the affordable high-speed internet they need to work and learn?
So as I said in my opening statement, I'm very much a proponent of making sure that we have access to broadband through our communication union districts. And I actually spoke on the floor when we were working on that bill in support of it. We need to utilize the federal dollars that we have coming in to build out the broadband to the last mile, to make sure people that are in rural Vermont have access to affordable internet. One of the ways that I've proposed that we do this is really looking at, as I said before, we have an aging population, and being able to draw down Medicaid for companionship and telemedicine and telehealth as a way to build out and have more uptake for these communication union districts so that they can reduce the cost to bringing it to the last mile. A lot of older Vermonters are not going to be able to afford the cost, but if there was a way that we could tie it into some of their access to healthcare, and it would probably help draw the cost down. So that's just one idea that I've been working on.
Thank you, Dan. Mac, do you need that question?
No, it was the broadband question?
Yeah, we
Yep.
need it. Belvidere.
Oh, yeah. A lot of people are able to work from home now instead of having to commute a long way to go to an office. And that's environmentally, that's a good thing. It saves money. It's all good. It sounds like we've spent quite a bit of money, or are about to, of the COVID money that we got, and also there's the satellite program that Elon Musk has. It's funded, I think, by selling memberships, but as far as I know, that's growing, and that might turn out to be a good option for Vermont. Where Tina and I live, it's the last phone pole, and some years ago they were trying to build out more fiber optic, and it never really seemed to develop. But one day I came home and the line truck boys are out there and they've got this guy cable, and so I went down to talk to them, and we were all laughing because there's no way that a company could ever recover the investment of running fiber to our house. At present, we're able to get our internet through the phone lines, and it works pretty good. So hopefully, with Musk's satellite system and the money that we're spending, we'll solve that problem.
Thank you, Mac. Richard.
Okay. Well, again, we're talking, broadband is a big issue. Like Mac, myself, I get my internet service through Consolidated. And again, I'm not streaming movies big time or needing massive power. So that system seems to work for me, and it's pretty reasonably cost. I'm just hoping that with this COVID money that has come out, that they are making just one-time expenditures and we're not building bureaucracies.
And Kate?
Thanks, yeah. This is an area where, at this moment in time, I feel really proud of the work that the Vermont State Legislature has done. I think the work the foresight of creating communication union districts, I think was a really brilliant move. It put us in a great position to receive federal funds when they came in. And what we're talking about is really mission-driven. You know, this is community-centered, and it's driven by missions to ensure that everyone has access to high-speed internet. It's based on the awareness that access to high-speed internet is an essential service that all people need in order to participate in their community and in the world right now, like electricity or anything that came before it. I think we're in a really good position. I do want to continue to watch how it rolls out and ensure that it remains affordable to all folks who need access to it. But at this moment in time, I feel like we're on the right track.
Thanks, Kate. At this point, I'll do what I did last time, and 2 questions from me, and we'll let you folks ask each other a round of questions. So the way this works is Mac is going to take the mic, and he's going to ask one of your opponents a question.
Dan, do you support school choice?
There you go, Dan.
So, school choice, I had school choice. My children went to Stowe. I live in Wolcott. It was definitely a reason we moved to that community, and I do support that. So, yeah, I would support school choice. It worked really well in my family, and so, yes.
Okay. Moving right along. So, Richard is next. Richard, choose an opponent to ask a question to.
Okay, thanks. Kate, you voted in favor of allowing Montpelier's non-citizens to vote. Both the Vermont Constitution and U.S. Constitution require voters to be U.S. citizens. Do you support allowing non-citizens to vote in our district?
Kate?
So one of the things that the state legislature votes on is when municipalities pass particular ordinances? What's the word for them exactly? Charter changes, thanks to the audience. And so charter changes are an interesting and unique moment on the floor, because essentially what you're being asked to do is vote in support of or against what a local community has voted on. And so with any kind of charter change, the first place I go is not necessarily the content of what they're voting on, but the fact that this is a local community that put this before their voters, and the voters approved it. And I believe it was a pretty popular vote in Montpelier. So I'm not in a position right now to speak on what I would or wouldn't support in my local community. I think if Hyde Park were to want to explore this, that would, start in its usual places. And I would be curious to watch that debate and discussion, and it would come to the voters. It wouldn't be ultimately my decision. And if I were sitting in the legislature, I would, again, unless barring some massive sort of concern for public safety, it's hard for me to imagine voting against what a town has decided is in their own best interest.
Thanks, Kate. Keep the mic in your hand and ask somebody a question.
Dan Noyes, how's it going? I wanted to ask you, reflecting on this last biennium in the last 2 years, what comes to mind for you in terms of something you're sort of most proud of or really stands out to you over this past biennium?
Dan?
Thank you. So I've been working on some legislation to create the Office of the Child, Youth, and Family Advocate for the past 5 years. And that bill passed the legislature, and the governor signed it this legislative session. I'm really proud of the work that my committee, the Human Services Committee, and the legislature and my colleagues in the Senate put into this to make this happen. I think it's really important now that we have many youth who are in the custody of the state who are not seeing really good outcomes at transitioning to adulthood. And having this office that can really look at best practices and to work with DCF and the Department of Education, as well as the Department of Health, to help the legislature really make good decisions around best practices and address some of the issues that youth who are in the custody of the state and foster families are dealing with. I'm the chair of the board. We're now going out to hire this position. We just came up with the job description, and there's 9 of us on the board, and looking forward to really seeing this get up and going. It's something I've been working on for a while, and been working with one of my constituents, Nate Farnham from Wolcott, on it, who grew up in foster care. He's been a real amazing advocate, and it's been great to work with him. Thank you.
And Dan, pose a question to an opponent.
Kate, can you tell me, in the last 2 years, what you're most proud of as your work in the legislature?
Kate, you guys are popular.
Thanks. I think what really stands out to me is the work that I did on H-399, which is a bill that came into my committee. I serve on the Judiciary Committee, and it was actually our local Restorative Justice Center was one of the central advocates for this bill. And the bill was looking at the impact of parental incarceration on youth, and how do we make sure that youth are taken into consideration when parents are facing sentencing. And the bill made it into committee, which is a big deal. That is not always taken up, and it's very hard to get to that point, but it was clear that it was not going to go anywhere. There were aspects of the bill that the chair and others, we weren't going to have the time to work out. And this is an area I'm very passionate about. And so I went to my chair and I asked if I could work on it. And essentially, I took the bill and began to work with the advocates on the bill. And what really stood out to me through this work is it culminated in, we had made a lot of movement, and we were at a good place, but we were stuck. And at one point, we were reaching crossover, which is basically, if you don't get this bill through committee by Friday, which at that point was 24 hours away, it dies. And that Thursday evening, I mediated a conversation between the Chief Superior Judge and the leading advocate, who is an incredible woman who had been incarcerated and in the act of incarceration had lost custody of her child and has become one of the most central advocates for this issue, and essentially held space for the top judge, one of the top judges in our states and one of the top advocates in our states. And together they hashed out a bill, and it came to committee 24 hours later. It passed out 11-0, made it out of the House, passed out of Senate, and it was signed into law by the governor. And I spoke in my intro about the skill set that I bring to legislation, my ability to work with varying parties to hold space and have hard conversations. And I feel like I brought that to this and allowed, people from very opposite ends of the spectrum to come together and to create legislation that works for them and that ultimately is going to do a lot to serve the youth of our state.
Thank you, Kate. All right, back to the moderator, and Max started that round off, so we'll go back to Richard to answer this next question first. Richard, a study released 2 years ago by ProPublica predicted that Lamoille County would be the safest county in America when it comes to the hazards posed by climate change. Go Lamoille. What does Vermont need to do to both battle climate change and prepare if there is indeed a mass influx of people moving here seeking cooler climates?
Well, that's quite a question. And I'm not sure that we're actually getting a complete story about climate change in this state. And I'm not, I think the laws and stuff that they've already got on the books can probably handle what growth they'll need or to work on that problem.
Thank you, Richard. Kate, same question. Do you need it repeated?
Sure, if you don't mind.
Okay, yeah. A study released 2 years ago by ProPublica predicted that Lamoille County would be the safest county in America when it comes to the hazards posed by climate change. What does Vermont need to do to both battle climate change and prepare if there is indeed a mass influx of people moving here seeking cooler climates?
Yeah, when I saw that study, or report, whatever it might be called, and the first thought I had was, we already have a housing crisis. And that's unfortunate that that's the first thought I have when we have, we live in this beautiful place that I'm very incredibly grateful for. But so what we're talking about, a confluence of two of the most complex policy issues that our state is facing, of climate change and housing. And anytime I am thinking about these really dense, complex issues, there's sort of a set of questions that I ask myself, and this is what I come back to. Who is most impacted by this issue? Do they currently have a seat at the table as policy decisions are being made? At those tables, are their voices being heard? And then ultimately, is the policy that's actually coming out of that discussion reflective of the needs that those most impacted have articulated? Because you can have anyone at the table, but if the policy doesn't reflect their needs, then it's nothing but lip service. And so when I think about these really complex issues, that's where my mind goes is we need to be very clear about our process as we are considering the policies around housing and around climate change. And in both of these areas, what I've heard in the community is that we're not effectively listening to those who are feeling most impacted. And by that I mean most specifically the lowest income Vermonters. We need to find a way to bring them to the table and to help ensure that they are feeling heard as we're navigating these really complex issues of climate change and housing.
Thank you, Kate. Dan, same question to you.
So climate refugees are definitely a real thing. They're here already. I was out on West Hill or East Hill in Wolcott and met a family that moved here from out west because they couldn't deal with the smoke anymore. Their children couldn't go to school because it's burning. And they said, we're out of here. And they came to Vermont. And we do need to think about if people are going to start moving here, we already have this housing crisis. We need to really look at some ways to start building more housing and having more access to housing in rural areas of our state. And one of the things that I've always really talked about was looking at water and wastewater in our rural communities and really prioritizing access to that in towns like Wolcott, where we don't have it. We've started talking about it, but we're not quite there yet. This will allow us to have more development in our village centers if we have the ability to have the water and wastewater there. We also need to really look at our permits and permit reform, especially in our village centers, downtowns, neighborhoods. It's not just reforming Act 250, it's really looking at some of the pieces around stormwater runoff, and I'm glad to get into the weeds with anybody on this. I'm working on some legislation around in the last session and in this session around transfer of stormwater runoff so that we can have denser development in our village centers and downtowns, and also really looking at the 5 mile, 10 unit Act 250 trigger and just getting rid of it. I put some legislation in last session to move that. We should incentivize transfer of development rights and plan unit developments through tax incentives so that we can have greater development in the communities and empower our communities to help make the decision of where they want it and how they want it.
Thank you, Dan. Next up, Mac.
It's refreshing to hear Democrats talk about repealing regulations. Some of us have been warning about over-regulation for years. And so I agree, Dan, we definitely do need to do that. I too know somebody that is a refugee of sorts, but because of water and because of a fear of a lack of hydro generation from Lake Mead. So I would return to my nuclear power thing. I really think that if we're serious about dealing with carbon emissions, we need to get with the nuclear program, because that's something that if we could repeal an enormous regulatory burden around the nuclear power industry with relatively quickly, we could have big, clean power. And so yeah.
All right. Mic drop. So next, Kate's going to answer the first, get the first chance at this one. Kate, the pandemic saw unprecedented levels of everything, but cooperation between federal, state, and local governments. What would you do in the legislature to grow those partnerships and provide flexibility so municipalities can effectively respond to unforeseen developments such as pandemics and deliver necessary services to the citizens?
Can I just get clarification around that question? Are you asking about increased partnership between municipalities and the state, or between the state and the federal government? Sorry.
Like kind of the tertiary,
everybody.
Congress has never been accused of being the most efficient animal these days. So but in the pandemic, all three branches seem to work together. But how do when it boils down to the municipality, I guess?
Yeah, I think one of the things that happened in the pandemic that's really rare is essentially they said, here is a bunch of money, and while there were a lot of strings attached to a lot of it, there was also this sort of unprecedented level of funding that municipalities had the freedom to use in the ways that they needed most. And I trust local communities to know what it is that they need. I think one of the things that comes to mind for me, and I'll see if I can sort of make the link, but what comes to mind for me is some of what gets in the way of municipalities having the freedom to use funding in the ways that they need is, at least the way I understand it, is sort of how our ed funding system is set up right now. And one of the things that we've been looking at is making some pretty radical shifts in ed funding. We took some steps in terms of weighting, which I think is really beneficial to our communities. I won't get too much into the weeds on that right now, but one of the next pieces they're looking at is shifting away from ed funding through property tax and shifting more to an income-based model for ed funding. And some of the hope is that doing this would benefit local municipalities in this way. So I think centrally, to answer the question, I think looking at how do we find ways to free up funds that don't have as many strings attached in particular ways so that municipalities can take that money and do with it what they know is best for their community.
Thanks, Kate. Next up, Dan Noyes.
Can you repeat the question, please? Sorry.
The pandemic saw unprecedented levels of cooperation between federal, state, and local governments. What will you do to grow those partnerships and provide flexibility so municipalities can effectively respond to unforeseen developments such as pandemics and deliver necessary services to their citizens?
So a lot of the federal money that came in had a lot of strings attached to it, and we couldn't just spend it any way we wanted. We had specific guidelines on how we could spend it, especially around infrastructure and if we were to do stormwater runoff permits or stormwater runoff mitigation with it. So it's really hard to, be creative in a really structured setting that the government kind of gives us around the funding that they bring in. So I think that I think that the best thing we can do is work with our congressional delegation to get clarification on how we can use the money and do infrastructure investments in rural communities around water and wastewater. This is our opportunity, and also around broadband. So, thank you.
Teale.
Could you repeat the question?
Sure, yeah. The pandemic saw unprecedented levels of cooperation between federal, state, and local governments. What would you do to grow those partnerships and provide flexibility so that municipalities can effectively respond to unforeseen developments and deliver necessary services to their citizens?
There was quite a bit of friction, actually, between the different branches of government when it came to COVID policy. So I wouldn't agree with that characterization of it. I personally think, and you know, it's easy to say in hindsight that we may have done quite a few things that we didn't need to do, and we most definitely may have spent a lot of money that we didn't need to spend. I'm impressed with town's abilities, with the state of Vermont's ability. I think the state probably could have got through COVID without all of that federal money. So I don't really see that there's a path that you could prescribe for that, because your sort of hypothetical crisis would dictate how you would respond.
Okay, thanks, Mac. Richard, same question.
I would tend to agree that we should probably go to the congressional delegation and say, why can't you send this money with fewer things attached to it, and let the municipality be able to spend. They know where they need to do these one-time expenditures that should be done.
Thanks, Richard. Okay. How about another round of ask the candidates, or the candidates ask each other stuff? So, who started that one? Kate started that one. So, Dan, you want to kick it off asking an opponent a question?
Kate, should you be reelected, which I hope you will, what are you going to work on? What's like some goals that you want to, or some legislation that you want to work on in the upcoming legislative session?
Sure. Let's see. One of the areas that I am interested in looking into is continuation of the work around reproductive liberty, and specifically looking at how to ensure protections for medical providers and mental health providers who are making their services available to folks for various healthcare procedures that are becoming illegal in other states. So how do we make sure that our providers here in our state have all the protections that they need? So I think, you know, this is an area that is, you know, getting a lot of politicization and a lot of polarization. But what we really just want to make sure is that we maintain the sanctity of the relationship between medical providers and the patients that they work with, and people feel safe. The other area that I'm really interested in working on further that has met a lot of resistance from the administration, but I think is really important to the overall economy and workforce, is expungements and sealing. We have a lot of people in our community who have criminal histories, and research tells us again and again that after a period of time and no offenses, reoffenses, that those people are just as safe to engage in community as any other person who has ever engaged in community. And yet we continue to have obstacles which we put in their way and in their path that prevent them from accessing workforce and housing and all of these various other things. And so I want to continue to work in the House Judiciary Committee to make it possible for those criminal records to be expunged or sealed so that people can re-engage in their community and the workforce in the way that is most meaningful to them and impactful to our community.
Thanks, Kate. Mac, ask an opponent a question.
What do I got for a question here? Kate, are you in favor of carbon taxes?
Kate?
So I appreciate the question. I think it's genuinely not an effort to dodge it by any means. I think what I find in terms of how I approach, again, these certain issues that are incredibly complex is I want to be thoughtful about them, and I want to look at the policy that's directly in front of me. And I'll be really frank, this term carbon tax is confusing to me. Sometimes it's used to actually refer to an actual tax. I think sometimes it's also used in this sort of politicized way to refer to costs being shifted to consumers. So one of the things that we've been trying to figure out how to do is to create pathways for businesses to transition into cleaner energy. That's, at its essence, what the Clean Heat Standard was all about. And one of the most politicized sort of messages around that policy approach was that it'll just get shifted to customers. And this notion, I think what is concerning to me about this kind of rhetoric is that with these massively complex issues, we need all members of our community to be willing and able to come to the table and think flexibly and creatively about how we're going to solve this together. We need the business community on board, we need the government on board, we need community members on board. And so framing things in terms of carbon taxes or no carbon taxes or cost shifts to customers, it really is all feels like this swirly way of getting away from this central issue which is that we need to figure out a path forward around climate change. We need to figure out how to do it in a way that, again, centers the needs of those who are most impacted, which is low-income Vermonters who are already suffering around energy costs. So, again, I'm not trying to dodge the question. I guess I just wonder about its intent, and I think centrally what I'm interested in is creative solutions to climate change.
Well, I think you answered the question. You're in favor of carbon taxes.
Okay, did you wanna follow up on that? Okay. Okay, Richard, your turn to ask an opponent a question.
Dan, as I've been campaigning through Wolcott, I cannot believe how badly the cell service is in Wolcott. I'm curious, you've been in the legislature for a few years. Why hasn't that improved at all over the last 3 or 4 or 5 years? To me, it's in the same spot that it was 5 years ago.
Dan.
Thank you. I'm a legislator, not like some ruler. I can't just like snap my fingers and make cell phone service happen. I'm one of 180 people in the legislature that has to work with Energy and Technology Committee and try to figure out through appropriations how we can make those investments through the private companies that provide cellular service. And I agree, it's definitely not good in Wolcott, especially in the village. You get into spots where it's really bad. And if you look at the topography, it's not conducive to cell service with towers. And then it's definitely something that we need to continue to invest in, but it's taxpayer dollars going into private companies to build infrastructure in the community, and we can't make them do it when the return on that is limited because there's not a lot of people in Wolcott. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Maybe we should ask your daughter. Didn't she drive around with 8 cell phones all over the state trying to find cell phones? Kate, you got the microphone. Ask a question.
Dan, what is it you have in mind? What are you looking forward to over the upcoming biennium, if you have the honor of being reelected?
Thank you. There's just an auditor's report came out by our auditor that talked about the amount of investment that the state, tax incentives that the state has made with businesses, which is super important, and it's great to have those jobs here. But maybe we should look at tax incentives around housing and development and through our municipalities, and give municipalities an opportunity to utilize transfer of development rights and planned unit developments and allow for cluster zoning where the communities want it, and incentivize developers by offering these homes with a reduced tax rate so that it will reduce the cost. I also want to look at the transfer of stormwater runoff mitigation. So I've been working with another legislator on this, where you have infill development in downtowns, neighborhoods, village centers, and if you only have, say, a 2-acre parcel and you want to build senior housing on it, you have to figure out how to mitigate that stormwater runoff on that. We should be looking at ways that we can transfer that mitigation within the watershed to still protect our environment, but allow that denser development. So that's something I want to explore. I don't have all the answers on that one, but I think it might be a way to enhance development for senior housing or infill housing in our village centers. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. And looks like Mac Teale is up to answer the first at this next question. Mac, pre-pandemic, way back then, two key issues that were vetoed by Governor Scott called for raising the minimum wage and offering paid family leave. Now, going into the next legislative session, with inflation raging right now and worker shortages all over the place, is it time to revisit the minimum wage question?
If you raise the minimum wage, it puts inflationary pressure. I'd like to see the minimum wage go up, but we already have an inflation problem, and so, and not only that, but I don't think there's very many people that actually get minimum wage. It seems like most of the businesses are offering more than that, and in some cases substantially more than that, and they still can't find any help. I guess I never really thought much of the paid family leave thing, just because having worked in the construction business my whole life, it seems like always the government wants to do this and that program to protect you, and it comes out of the worker's pocket. So I don't think we need to have a paid family leave program. I think that would just mean less money in the pockets of hardworking Vermonters.
Thank you, Mac. And bring the mic on down to Richard.
Okay, the minimum wage, I would not support raising it any further at this point in time. I think the employers need to have that $15 an hour rate to be able to train new employees. And as Mac has stated, the way the economy now is going, a lot of businesses are paying above that rate and it's still having problems getting jobs filled. So I think I'd like to leave it where it is and make that a tool for the business to use to invest in their employees or in their new employees or kids coming in out of school, out of high school or whatever for to work in the afternoon for these businesses. That would help them and it would help those employers and hopefully make them more sustainable. And paid family leave, I'm thinking I liked the governor's volunteered paid family leave program that he had offered and I think was shot down in the legislature, but I'm not thinking that I would support businesses having to pay into a fund to pay for paid family leave.
Thank you, Richard. Kate?
Do you mind repeating the question?
Yeah, pre-pandemic, two key issues that were vetoed by Governor Scott called for raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour and offering paid family leave. With inflation raging right now and a workforce shortage, is it time to revisit the minimum wage?
I guess a short answer would be yes. I mean, I think we need to be looking at all methods of ensuring that our lowest paid workers in our state have access to a wage that they can live on. And while there's examples being given of businesses that have tremendous flexibility in what they offer to pay the incoming workforce, that's not the case, as I understand it, for some of our largest employers, such as nonprofit agencies, places that are paying folks who do direct service in the healthcare industry. These folks are making true minimum wage, and it is an impossible income to live off of. I think what's really important to center in my mind when I think about wages and paid family leave, childcare, is there's the finances of it in their individual homes in our state and with our employers, but we're talking about the mental burden of attempting to live your life when you simply cannot afford your life. Talking about the mental burden of a parent trying to decide what bill they're going to pay or not pay so that they can cover childcare, so that they can cover the care of their ailing parent. We're talking about the significant mental health crises that develop when people cannot be available to care for the people that they love, who are in acute medical crisis, who are giving birth to their child. We've talked about the tremendous mental health and long-term health impacts of those earliest days of a child's life. What is it like when a parent is not available to tend to that child's needs? So I think we need to think about these things in a much more complex way than simply how much are we paying for a minimum wage.
Thank you, Kate. Dan Noyes.
When I had the opportunity to vote for minimum wage last time around, I voted no, because we have no idea what it costs to deliver services for home and community-based providers. And if we all of a sudden tell home health and these long-term care providers that they have to pay $15 a minimum wage, they can't print money. They're going to have to increase eligibility and decrease services to the people that rely on someone to come into their home and care for them. Many of these people that work providing this in-home care are reimbursed through Medicaid, and those rates are less than $15 minimum wage, $12. So we need to have a plan before we start looking at minimum wage, how we're going to make sure that the people rely on this care can still get it, and that we don't bankrupt our nursing homes and our home health agencies by all of a sudden telling them that they're still having to provide these services, but at a higher wage rate. It's important that these individuals that are providing this care make a livable wage. I can't believe how many can work at that rate. So I do support increasing the minimum wage at the same time as trying to figure out how we provide for our home and community-based providers so that they can still be there when any one of us maybe needs that in-home care. I also support paid family leave. I voted for it last time. I would vote for it again. And I'm also really interested in a long-term care trust fund to really shore up nursing homes and long-term care.
Thank you, Dan. At this point, we're about an hour and 15 minutes into this one. I just wanted to, I have more questions, but I didn't know if anybody in the audience planned on asking any questions. Okay, I got it. Yeah, I got some hands. So I'll turn some over to the audience right now. We'll see how much time we have after that and see if I have any more questions. So all three of you in the same row that I saw hands on. So I saw your hand first, so if you want to come on up, Mariana.
First, I just want to say thank you all for being up here and putting yourselves out there like that. It's not an easy thing to do and something I would never do, so I really appreciate it. I wanted to ask, historically, our governments have really been lacking in diversity and have been very white and very male, and especially in Vermont, and older, and often full of folks who have enough of a comfortable income that they can provide these services to the state for a short period of time on a low income. And I'm just curious to all of you, if you support diversifying the legislature, and if so, how?
I believe Mac started that one off. So, or did Richard start that one? I think it was Mac. Mac started that one off. So, Richard, do you want to take the first whack at that question?
Well, to get that diversity to happen, I guess those folks are going to have to step up to the plate and run for those offices. I don't know what else to say about it.
Okay, Kate?
Full disclosure, that was my lovely wife asking that question. She feels important to name that. I did not speak to her about that question in advance, but I just want to name that that connection exists. Yeah, this is take me off this stage, and it's a much less diverse picture. And I did step up, and I did run. And the reality of it is it's been brutally difficult for my family. It has been brutally difficult financially. It has been difficult emotionally. These have been some of the hardest years for our family. They've been some of the hardest years in my marriage. And some of the aspects of that are not just what's asked of us in terms of our time and commitment, but also being a queer person. One of the first things that we did when I was running for office is change the locks on our doors. I was doing racial equity work at the time. I'm an out queer person. There were white supremacist group stickers popping up around our district, and we were scared about what this meant for our family. In the time that I've served, over 2 years, I've been directly targeted by the Vermont GOP. I've had my face plastered over social media with the word extremism written under it. It's been shared on social media with the hashtag groomer, essentially meaning that because I support the care of queer and trans youth, I am somehow a child abuser. These things place my life at risk. And when I talk to people in the state legislature who are queer, identified, who are Black and brown, they all have their own stories of this kind of treatment. This is about more than money. It's about the mental burden. It's about creating safe spaces for people to serve, not simply how much they make or how the structure of the legislature plays out. But these are real issues, and I believe in truly representative government. We need diverse voices at the table. And if we don't find a way to sort this out, if we don't think creatively about the structure of our government, about the income, and about our safety, and what are we asking of our public officials, it's gonna look like this. It's really hard. So I would ask you, really, I'm like really putting it out there truly to the community, I'm begging you, whether I'm at this table or not, like, be kind to the people serving in these roles. Be kind to them. If you have a queer person serving, a Black, brown person serving, and it takes them longer to respond to an email, be kind to them about that. They're under a level of stress and burden that simply is not the same for the other people who are serving. I'm gonna step back for a minute and take a deep breath. This is an area I'm clearly really passionate about, and I appreciate the question.
Thank you, Kate. Dan Noyes.
Thank you, Kate. Thank you for serving. I'm glad you're there. I'm glad you're my seatmate, and over the last 2 years, it's been a pleasure working with you. Kate's right. We do need more diversity in the legislature, and it's not an easy place to work. It's a full-time job. It literally, every day, I got stuff going on. Luckily, I can make it work. My children don't live at home anymore. My wife, Amy, who's here, is pretty psyched. I don't talk to her all day. I get to talk to other people. It is a lot of work, and everything that Kate said is very true. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. And you, Mac.
I don't know, but it seems like the number of or the diversity of the government matches pretty much what the state is. And so I would be super hesitant to try to force that. How would you try to force that? So would you tell some people, well, you can't run because you're, not a man, or you're not a woman, or you're a person of color? I think the only way that we can deal with that is for the public to just elect the people who they want, because I don't think you can force that.
Thank you, Mac. We had a couple more hands up. We saw Ed and we saw Lucian. So Ed, go ahead.
I'm going to ask essentially the same question that I asked Avram, and that is on 8715, clean heat standard. That, from all the reporting I saw, was created to raise the tax on propane, kerosene, oil, gas, all of which are important to Vermonters, and it directly would affect affordability. I'd like everybody to answer this, do you think that increasing the cost to Vermonters to force us into, getting rid of these is a good idea, especially when we were told to turn off the air conditioners this summer and not plug in electric cars, but do you remember that? Anyway, thank you.
And thank you, Ed. And Kate, you get the first go at that one.
You know, I get there's so much said about the clean heat standard that I get swirly in my own brain about what I think is true. My understanding of the clean heat standard is that essentially we have set certain climate goals that we are accountable to in our state. And the clean heat standard was the sort of central recommendation of the group that has been tasked with making climate change recommendations. And what we're trying to figure out how to do is to shift our reliance away from fossil fuels into more clean energy. And one of the concerns that's come up is how do we make this sort of massive market shift, essentially? And understandably, there's a lot of concern about volatility in markets and whatnot. And some of the essential aspects of the clean heat standard, as I understand it, was to create a path forward that would support businesses, that would allow them to understand how to phase into this space. It offered incentives. It offered opportunities to talk in communities about how to roll this out. It has a bounce back to the legislature where we come back and we look at it and we get to decide if we're going to move forward with it. You know, all the concerns I'm hearing about volatility and businesses not being prepared, my understanding is the Clean Heat Standard was designed exactly to address those concerns. And so I get confused about the misinformation out there about it. And my hope is that we, you know, if not through the vehicle of it's certainly not happening through the vehicle of the bill last year, it was vetoed. But essentially that we can keep coming back to these questions. How do we do this? How do we do this in a way that works for businesses? How do we do this in a way that works for low-income Vermonters?
Thanks, Kate. And Dan?
So there's a ton of misinformation out there on this bill. I'm just going to quote from the bill, H715. At the bottom of page 21, subchapter 8129 states that the Commission shall not file proposed rules with the Secretary of State or issue any orders implementing the Clean Heat Standard without specific authorization enacted by the General Assembly. That's us, the legislature. Further down in the bill, in session law, section 3F, this top of page 25, the bill goes into detail on point. Subsection 1 states, on or before January 15th, 2024, the Commission shall submit to the General Assembly final proposed rules to implement the Clean Heat Standard. Then language from subchapter 8129 is repeated here again, saying the Commission shall not file the final proposed rule with the Secretary of State until specifically authorization is enacted by the General Assembly to do so. I had them come and fill my oil tank for $1,000. We got to figure out what we're going to do. It's pretty expensive right now. That's not, I think that the Clean Heat Standard and just trying to figure out how we heat our homes is important. And it does need to come back to the legislature. And that's why I supported the override and supported the bill.
Thanks, Dan. Mac?
I don't know about the bill or anything else, but what I do know is that the idea, the general idea, is that we got to raise money in order to transition away from fossil fuels to primarily electricity. And that's problematic for me because we are not going to have the amount of electricity that we're going to need if we do that. So there is no viable alternative at the moment unless you use nuclear power. But since that's not being discussed much, the problem that I have with the whole thing is that you want to transition away from fossil fuels. I understand that. I'd like to do that. But you need to have a viable alternative before you do that. And the funding mechanism for the transition is taxing fossil fuel. So, and I don't think that's a good idea.
Thank you, Mac. And Richard, your take.
Well, again, I'm not familiar with the actual legislation. If, in fact, there is a tax in that bill, I would not be supporting it. I'm looking to have the free market try to get the solutions to these problems. And again, I'm not opposed to trying to lower our carbon footprint, but I'm not going to support any taxes to try to get there.
Thanks, Richard. And Lucian, do you have a question as well from the audience?
Yeah, I do, please. I want to thank you all for coming here tonight and standing up here and let us shoot questions at you. I don't think Mr. Teale did a very good job on nuclear power. He knows more about it than what he's saying. What kind of nuclear power would you have, Max?
Well, the reactors that we presently use are not
Yeah, sorry, Mac.
the reactors that we should use.
Can you,
They
can you say that again, Mac? Wait, just the TV,
Oh,
mic
okay.
headset, thanks.
The reactors that we use now are light water reactors. And the big problem with those is that you got to cool them all the time. And you got to cool the spent fuel that's just come out of them. But we have molten salt reactors that can burn the spent fuel that we have. So in addition to providing big power for a really small footprint, we can deal with the waste fuel problem that we don't have an answer for. So, is that better?
Yeah, and you can build them all over the place. You don't have to have one down in Mount Vernon or wherever.
That's correct.
You can build a bunch of small ones, and you wouldn't have to do so much infrastructure on your power lines.
That's right.
Because we've already got them.
Yep, I think the most promising nuclear technology is manufactured reactors. And you can put manufactured reactors in series so that if one of them is not enough, you can put 2 or 3 or 4. And we could solve this problem. We've always solved huge problems in the United States. And we're pretending as a country that, well, that doesn't exist. That's taboo. You can't talk about that. So I don't know what to make of it.
So my question to the other three, would you support nuclear power?
No.
Man of many words.
I'm open to learning about any sort of any renewable, efficient, method of energy that helps us, gain traction in our climate change goals, and that's cost effective and safe. I would need to know more about it. I would need the people who research such things to do that work and bring it to us, and I would consider whatever proposal would be in front of me.
Yes, I would support nuclear power, most definitely.
Okay, thank you. We said an hour and a half, so I have one more question on my list. I might as well just check it off and we'll go to closing statements. And I believe Kate answered that one first. So Dan, you get the first shot at this one. Lamoille County continues to be ravaged by opioids, one of the worst hit counties, if not the worst hit county in the state. This is driving crime, it's leading to overdoses, and it's straining resources in all kinds of services. Is the state on the right track to tackling this issue? And if not, what needs to change?
So we are making advances and we are going the right direction. And just going to Johnson and meeting with the Tatros and looking at the work they're doing through Jenna's Promise will show you that there are some creative solutions out there to help people get into treatment, into recovery, back into the workforce, and to not be in addiction anymore and possibly dying. I think we need to look at some of our treatment and access to treatment. A lot of individuals who are who need help have very limited access to transportation. So we really need to figure out how to go to them, and maybe looking at some telemedicine, which we're starting to work on, but also mobile treatment, whether it's mental health treatment or medically assisted treatment, to go to them. Because if you don't have a car and you live in Belvidere and your treatment is in Barry, it's kind of hard to get there.
Thank you, Dan. Go to Mac.
One of the things that I have learned in the process of this campaign by going to Jenna's Promise, and Rich and I went to Teen Challenge. It's almost like this problem is underreported because we're embarrassed or uncomfortable with it. And the people that I've talked to about it, I'd ask them, well, why do people get involved in such a dangerous and addictive drug? And hopelessness. And so while I think the Teen Challenge model and the Jenna's Promise model, can solve the problem once people become addicted, I'd like to think that we could, if we could work together to just create a more robust economy of Vermont that's easier to live in, that's more affordable, and try to address the hopelessness that manifests in drug addiction. Because the people that I've, at Jenna's Promise and at Teen Challenge, agreed with that assessment that, basically people just are out of hope, that things aren't going to get better, and so they turn to using drugs. And so we have to do the treatment thing, but we also need to strengthen our economy, give people hope.
Thank you, Mac. Richard, your take.
Yes, opioids are killing many of our family members, friends, and fellow Vermonters. This is a crisis in Vermont with over 250 deaths this past year. We need to be proactive to solve this problem. And as Mac stated, on the campaign trail, we've been and visited with Jenna's Promise and Teen Challenge, who offer long-term support to assist these Vermonters off their addiction. These valuable programs give their clients work skills, housing, assist them in getting their GEDs, and in some cases provide a job to build their self-esteem. These programs have a higher success rate and need to be replicated throughout the state of Vermont. On the other side of this picture, the law enforcement side, the police need to start arresting local dealers and put them in jail. The thrust appears to be trying to get this top drug dealer. No, we need to stop the street dealing. We spoke to one community member who said he could tell you all the people in the neighborhood who were dealing drugs, but the police didn't bother arresting them because they'd end back up on the street. There was also another comment that a couple of comments were they thought building the wall on the southern border would help stem the flow of the fentanyl coming into the country. And then there was also another person that we talked with, and I support completely, is educating the young children in school about drug addictions and the problems that occur when they get addicted.
Thank you, Richard. Kate?
Thanks. I have to say it's really heartening to sit up here with folks of varying political perspectives and to have everyone acknowledge the severity of this issue and the humanity of this issue. I think that's telling of how far we've come in terms of addressing the stigma related to substance use disorder. We have not come nearly far enough, but it is heartening. We've made a lot of progress in Vermont in terms of how we provide access to treatment. And with recovery, before you even can enter recovery, you need to be able to access treatment in the moment when you are ready immediately. And we've taken a lot of steps in an attempt to do that. But one of the things that you need to be in order to access treatment is alive. And there are far too many people in Vermont who continue to die alone every year because of this crisis. One of the ways we've attempted to consider addressing this is borrowing from models that have worked in other places that are harm reduction models, such as safe injection sites. This has been, any legislation we've considered in this way has received zero support from the administration. The other area that we look at is decriminalization. How do we ensure that people have access to their community? There's this important distinction that we want to make between the dealers and the users. And one of the ways that we're trying to address that through policy is to create a mechanism for defining personal use. How much does one person need to hold? We did a lot of work on this last year, and we put forward a bill that would just create a panel of public health officials and people with lived experience who could help us define personal use. And because that was in the bill, it was vetoed by the governor. I'm not trying to suggest that Governor Scott is somehow lacks understanding or empathy or compassion for this issue, but I do believe that we have a fundamental challenge right now in terms of figuring out the most effective strategies for moving forward in a policy manner in partnership with the administration using tools that we know are effective at keeping people alive. So integrated supports such as Jenna's Promise are essential, but the area we're failing is the people who are dying alone. And currently, it's very frustrating, to be very frank, that we have made such efforts in the legislature to address these issues, and it continues to hit a wall with the administration, and I hope we can make progress further in this next biennium.
Thank you, Kate. Now we're on to closing questions, and I just want to reiterate, thank you all for coming out tonight. Whatever's going on out there, I can hear it on the roof. And some of you have been here for 3 hours and 45 minutes, so I really appreciate it. And to everybody viewing on Green Mountain Access TV and to Green Mountain Access TV, thank you so much, and to People's Academy for hosting this. 1 minute closing statements. We'll go in reverse alphabetical order this time. So Mac Teale, start us off with a 1 minute closing statement, please.
Okay, and in closing, I think the government is trying to do too many things, and it's too involved in our lives. And to sort of echo Ben Olson, I think the people of Vermont, the people of the United States are pretty good at doing stuff, and so the freedom that Americans have enjoyed for so long that's been bought at such a cost is definitely under threat. So I hope that you guys will vote for me and send me to Montpelier so that I can try to make the government smaller. And thank you all for coming.
Thank you, Mac. How about you, Dan?
Thank you for taking the time to join me at tonight's debate. Over the past 6 years, I have put party politics aside when it comes to doing what's best interest for my community. I feel that my ability to partner with my colleagues, regardless of party affiliation, has given me the ability to move important legislation, like the Office of the Child, Youth, and Family Advocate, and increase the tax exemption on military pensions and Social Security. It has also helped me bring legislators together through the Older Vermonters Caucus to make sure systems of supports are strong and accessible for all Vermonters. Above all, it's helped me build a strong network that I can lean on to make sure that the residents of Wolcott, Hyde Park, Johnson, and Belvidere are represented in Montpelier. I ask for your vote. Thank you.
Next up, Kate.
Yeah, I didn't prepare a closing. I think I just wanted to take an opportunity to, again, name what a tremendous honor it's been to serve my community for the last 2 years. I have so much respect for the people in our communities who step up and serve in any capacity. It is tireless and thankless work that is underpaid if it's paid at all, and it is the oil and grease that keeps our communities functioning and keeps us connected. I also just want to take this opportunity. I had a moment to reflect on just how challenging some of the last 2 years have been, and I just want to take an opportunity to thank my wife, Mariana, who has just been incredible throughout this stretch, through the ups and the downs, and talking about the importance of public service, but it is more than just the person who's stepping up. It is an entire network of people who have their back. And Mariana, you have had my back in a tremendous way, and I just want to thank you.
Richard Bailey, let's take us home.
Okay, thanks. I would like to say thanks to everybody up here at the table. It was a very interesting and invigorating discussion. And as I stated earlier in my opening, I plan, if elected, to work cooperatively with Governor Scott on his stated agenda of growing the economy, making Vermont more affordable, protecting the vulnerable, and cherishing our natural resources. If elected, I will represent the needs of my neighbors and rural Vermonters and not the agenda of a political party or out-of-state special interest. I did not run for the office to advance my political career. I'm running because I believe Montpelier needs more common sense Vermonters like me and fewer lawyers and career politicians who have been in Montpelier so long. They have lost touch with the people like you and me, and I would be my privilege to serve my neighbors in my district and my state, and I'd ask for your support. And I too would like to ask for your vote. And make sure you fill out your ballot. Most of the people have got them now, or vote in person on November 8th. Good evening, and thank you very much.
Thank you, candidates, and give it up for the 4 folks from Lamoille-2. All right, everybody drive safe with whatever's out there.